Next couple of weeks as well. Now, joining me here in the studio to talk budget is Parliamentary Secretary Darren Chester and Labor MP Kelvin Thompson. I nearly forgot your name for a second. I want to turn our attention to the budget now. 70 agencies to be merged or axed. That is the latest reports are coming out today. There's some obvious cuts here, isn't there, Kelvin? If we look at the Abalone Association workshop, the Antarctic Animal Ethics Committee, the Pulp and Paper Advisory Group, that would suggest that there's a bit of fat to cut.
Well, I suspect that the savings from those sort of changes are largely cosmetic and Mickey Mouse savings. I'm more concerned about the prospect of thousands of public servants losing their jobs, which would have an adverse economic impact as well as an adverse impact on the operations of government. I'm concerned, for example, at reports that the Australian Renewable Energy Agency is to be abolished. This is a government which has attacked renewable energy. There were reports just last Friday of the prospect of thousands of jobs in Victoria being lost if the renewable energy target is not pursued and persevered with. That would impact on country Victoria. I think that this is a government which has been hostile to renewable energy, so it's things like that that concern me.
Yes, it is easy to pick out some of those more obscure groups that will be axed, Darren Chester, but when it comes to the Renewable Energy Agency, by scrapping this, does this lead voters to question your commitment to that 2020 target?
Well, as a fundamental point, and Kelvin indicated, he referred to some of these savings supposedly as Mickey Mouse, but the savings all add up. If we have a duplication of service, if we have waste, if we have mismanagement, I think it's important that the Australian government, the Treasurer, the Finance Minister, the Prime Minister take steps to get the budget back into shape. I think there's a commonly held view around Australia that we can do a little bit better in terms of managing taxpayers' money and start spending taxpayers' money like it's our own money, actually get value for money. And I think that's a fundamental point.
But the Renewable Energy Agency, what message does that send?
I think the fundamental point in relation to the Renewable Energy Agency is that the government, the coalition government, is supportive of renewable energies. We do believe, though, that in the future the renewable energy industry is going to have to be able to compete on its own 2 feet. It can't. Any industry which relies continually.
You can still reach that 2020 target without such an agency?
We're very confident of that. But the point I was going to make is that any industry which relies entirely for its reason to exist upon government investment has a very limited future. They remain at the whim of the government of the day, and I believe that the industries right across Australia need to make sure that they have a long-term viable future based on their own model of doing business.
And Kelvin, this was an agency that the Coalition always flagged it was going to scrap. It's not a surprise here.
No, it is a surprise. The government has indicated in the past that it was supportive of renewable energy, but since coming to government has been hostile to renewable energy. We need to move away from fossil fuels into renewable energy. There are jobs and prosperity and leading edge technology to be had from making this transformation, and the Renewable Energy Agency has an important part to play in that.
Yeah, sure, but what point, as Darren said, does the renewable energy sector stand on its own 2 feet? Do you expect the agency to be a support beam forever, or...?
No, well, there's a question of business confidence and sovereign risk here. Governments have been saying that we're going to move to renewable energy, have a 20% target. People make investments on that understanding, and if you pull away that understanding, those investments will cease, and that will be to the detriment of jobs in Victoria and elsewhere.
So you don't think that target can be reached without the agency?
Well, what I want the government to do is to commit to that target. Now, it has had it's set in place a review, and it's had many of its people undermining that target and undermining support for renewable energy, undermining confidence in renewable energy, leading to projects being put on ice, put on hold. We don't want to see that. We want to see confidence, we want to see investment, and we want to see the jobs that come with that.
Darren Chester, you just said you're confident that that target can be reached, but would your constituents, for example, be sad to see such a target go?
The target go, or the renewable energy?
The target.
Look, I think it's quite ironic to sit here and begin a lecture on issues like sovereign risk from a member of a previous government who shut down a live export trade and decimated that industry, from a member of a previous government who introduced a mining resource rent tax without any thought at all about issues of sovereign risk and the fact that capital will then flee to other countries. So I won't sit here and be lectured about decisions we've made in good faith and taken to the Australian people. As I understand, in relation to renewable energy targets, the government remains committed to the funding that's been allocated to the various projects around Australia. So there is no aspect of sovereign risk to this debate at all. What we're talking about is whether we can do things better in a more streamlined way in Australia and reduce the waste of taxpayers' money.
We could go around in circles on this for a while, but I want to move on to the Rural Finance Counselling Service and the Farm Finance Concessional Loan Scheme. Now, they aren't on today's list of cuts. Are these two areas that the Nationals have fought hard for behind the scenes?
Well, I'm not sure what's on the list of proposed savings. I'm not sure what's on the list. You see different reports in newspapers, and I mentioned on this program a matter of a couple of weeks ago, it is a mug's game to try and predict what's in and out of budgets, because you hear stories one day and they're changed the next. I can afford to wait the 24 hours and see what's actually in the budget before I comment too much more in relation to those sort of issues. But there are issues that come up from time to time which individual members of Parliament, whether they be in Labor, Liberal, Greens or Nationals, are particularly passionate about, and they advocate for them. And it'll be no surprise to your viewers that the Nationals advocate very strongly on a whole range of regional policies. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, but that doesn't stop us from going and having that fight.
And Kelvin, for your constituents and personally, is there any no-go agencies that you would be really worried about if they did get axed in tomorrow's budget?
Well, there are a whole series of agencies which are doing good work and the loss of which would damage the circumstances for many of my constituents. One which is mentioned is the Medicare locals. Now, Darren talked about fighting for rural bodies. I had correspondence from the Lower Murray Medicare local talking about the great work they were doing in Mildura and that region. Similarly, Medicare local does work in my area for my constituents. This is a government which went to the electorate promising that it would not get rid of Medicare locals, and now we hear that it is going to get rid of Medicare locals. So there are many agencies doing important work. If those agencies are scrapped, that work will be lost.
OK, Kelvin Thompson, Darren Chester, stay with us. We're going to take a quick break here on Lunchtime Agenda. Welcome back to Lunchtime Agenda. Kelvin Thompson and Darren Chester join me on my panel today. Now, Darren Chester, before the break we were talking about the details of the budget, and you said, yes, let's wait until tomorrow till we do see the details. You haven't seen all the details. Has that been a bit of a source of frustration? Has the backbench and at your level, the parliamentary secretary role, been in a bit of black hole of information?
Well, I think it's the nature of these things. Members of Parliament who are not in part of the Expenditure Review Committee, and keep in mind there's only a handful of senior ministers in that committee, rely on information from various sources, and sometimes the accuracy of that information isn't too spot on. But I think we've got to the stage now, we're 24 hours out, the budget will come out tomorrow. I think the Australian people want to get it over and done with in many regards. They're probably tired of the speculation, they want to know what's in and what's out. I understand that, and I can have a lot of empathy for them on that point. The challenge will be then for the Liberal Nationals, the coalition, to then explain to the Australian people exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the budget back in order. We're trying to make sure that any tough decisions we make today, that the pain, if there is any pain, is evenly shared as much as possible. We want people to understand that we're all in this together. We're all going to be in this together. There's a repair job required on the basic fundamentals of the budget, and we're prepared to do it. And there will be some tough decisions made tomorrow night.
I've got a feeling that's going to be a message we're going to hear a lot over the next couple of weeks. But Kelvin, there is also a test for the opposition here. This will be Bill Shorten's first budget in reply speech. He says he doesn't like the debt levy, it's a broken promise, but ultimately, do you think Labor should stand in the way of the government enforcing this?
Well, we have to see what comes forward tomorrow night. But where the government seeks to bring forward things for which it has no mandate, things that it did not talk about before the election, things like co-payments on Medicare or increased costs for university students, or the deficit levy, or petrol excise indexation, these are all things that it did not talk about before the election and for which it has no moral authority whatsoever. It seems to me that the opposition may well block them and say, we do not support these things. They will have an adverse impact on ordinary Australians' living standards, and we will vote against them.
But philosophically, are you opposed to a debt levy on people earning over $180,000 a year?
Well, people talk about the budget deficit, but they should also talk about the trust deficit, the gap between politicians and the public, And, you know, if we had $1 for every time Tony Abbott said that he would restore trust and integrity to Australian politics during the previous parliament, we could probably fix the budget deficit. The point is that he talked about restoring trust and integrity. He has gone down completely opposite path, and he needs to be held accountable for that.
Darren Chester, it's going to be a tough sell over the next couple of weeks. You yourself said it's going to be a tough budget. I think a lot of constituents are a bit nervous about some of the measures that have been put forward. How are you going to sell this?
Well, we'll be upfront. We'll be upfront and honest with the Australian people and explain to them the fact that we inherited a mess. And I'm not going to live in the past and talk about Labor for the rest of my career in politics, but the fundamentals of our budget, the structural problems we have, need to be addressed.
But they're not immediate structural issues, are they? They're longer term.
And that's an important point to make, that if we don't make decisions now to address some of these significant structural problems, the decisions we make in the future are going to have to be even harder, and they're going to be even more difficult. And I recognise Kelvin's comments there, that he suggests perhaps we don't have a mandate for some of the things being discussed in the media, but we had a mandate to repeal the carbon tax, we had a mandate to repeal the mine resource rent tax, and the Labor Party has stood in the road of that. It's very cheeky politics from the member beside me to suggest that we don't have a mandate for some of these things, when the ones we do have a mandate for, the Labor Party is opposing anyway.
Are we in this ridiculous situation now, Kelvin, where everything needs to be stated before an election campaign, and now governments, once they get in, are hamstrung? Are you saying that it's Tony Abbott that has created these standards, and that's what you're going to hold him to?
Well, certainly if he says that we can balance the books by stopping Labor's waste and mismanagement, and rather than saying we are going to balance the books with a Medicare co-payment or by indexing fuel excise and the like, then he needs to be held to account for that. And if we had introduced indexation of petrol, Tony Abbott and co would have referred to that as a carbon tax, and we'd have had a convoy of no confidence marching on Parliament House. So we'll wait to see if the convoy of no confidence comes marching on Parliament House over the indexation of petrol and the other broken promises.
All right, Kelvin Thompson, Darren Chester, a pleasure as always. Thanks for joining me on Lunchtime Agenda. Will be plenty more debate over the next couple of weeks. And that is it for the program today. And also we'll keep you up to date throughout the afternoon on the 2 royal commissions running in both Brisbane and Sydney.